Podcasts are one of the best ways to build trust with potential customers and to create a base of content that can be used for marketing and sales. Much of the podcast industry, however, is focused on B2C or entertainment or all of those other areas. So Build That Podcast is bringing you the B2B Pod Con. It's a conference specifically designed for you in the B2B space. Join hundreds of B2B podcast professionals this November in Nashville, Tennessee, and learn from industry leaders, experienced podcasters, and content strategists. Walk away motivated with actionable steps that you can implement immediately. So tickets go on sale July 24th at the best price you will find. So go to b2bpodcon.com to learn more. Make sure to sign up for the email list. We're going to send out updates on speakers as well as ticket information as it becomes available, all of it through the email. Don't miss the premier event for B2B podcast professionals. Go to b2bpodcon.com to learn more. So let's look at principle 3 is find your niche. So how does that work against you? I was really looking forward to this one. How's it work against you?
This is the one where I think, again, a lot of small, medium-sized business owners have some mild trauma. You know, I had a client show up to my message maker process the other day. It was her first session, and we were going to talk about her audience, how things align. And she put her hands up like this, and she said, I don't have a niche. I got to tell you, I don't have a niche. And I was there to tell her that that's okay. It is okay to have not a non-narrow segment of the population that you work with. It is okay not to have a hyper specialty in what you offer and who you offer to, especially as you're getting started. But again, I think to the client that I mentioned earlier during this conversation, he knows who he services, but it's not hyper segmented. And in fact, he wouldn't have experienced the growth that he did if he'd only focused on a certain type of homeowner, right? Is he geographically bound? Sure. But he's not hyper specialized. There's a lot that he can do from the position of focus as opposed to hyper niching.
Welcome to It's Marketing's Fault, the podcast where we discuss how to do marketing the right way. I'm your host, Eric Rutherford. Hey, before we get into the episode, couple of quick reminders. First, after the episode, after the conversation, I'm going to give you a recap. We're going to hit the 3 key points from the conversation just as a summary. So make sure you stick around and listen to that. Second, I would encourage you, if you find this episode helpful, leave a review wherever you're listening to podcasts. That helps other people find it and also gives feedback on what we're doing well. So let's jump into today's episode. I am thrilled today because I have with me Erica Breuer. She is a messaging and positioning strategist who helps service providers make their expertise and valuable impossible to overlook. And her methodology is driven by the belief that sharing your brilliance shouldn't require an MBA in marketing, which I truly appreciate, nor in philosophy. And but her philosophy has earned her advice syndication by outlets such as Fast Company, Inc. magazine, Forbes, just a wealth of experience. Erica, welcome to the show.
Hey, Eric, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. And I was excited to have this conversation because I really wanted to get into this content strategy, this branding, because you've been in the world of content strategy for a bunch of years. So what's different today than, say, initially I was going to say 10 years ago, but now it's like, man, that's like 5 years ago. It is, yeah. So how's it different today versus, say, 5-10 years ago?
I like to think of it in 2 ways. People are smarter and people are also having a lot more fun. And that's on both sides of the table. Creators are getting smarter, and the audiences are getting smarter, right? So the same cheap tricks or the basic content strategy that might have worked even in 2019 no longer works anymore. And like I said, people are also having a lot more fun. I love things that are polished. like your podcasts. And you'll see a lot of folks aren't doing the overproduced, overstructured content that they were just a few years ago. I find that folks, and especially the brands and voices that stand out the most, have a lot more humanity in the way that they're showing up. They're not just sticking to their key talking points, those obstacles, objectives, outcomes, that their audience wants to achieve. They actually speak about a range of things. They're not just a reverse Wikipedia entry, if you will, when they're creating content. So people are smarter, creators are smarter, and everyone's having a lot more fun as a result.
I appreciate those 2 points because I've kind of seen that flow as well. The idea of fun, that humanity sort of, I say leaking in, but I think it's good. I think it's good to kind of see, excuse me, that less polished in a lot of ways. And that's one of the things I think, even with podcasts, that's one of the things I sort of preach and I'm a champion of is don't worry about all the ums and ahs. We just want the listeners to join us in this.
Yeah, I'll definitely give you some ums and ahs today.
That's awesome because I do it as well. And that's one of the hardest things about learning how to listen to my own voice has been just getting used to my own little nuance, those repetitive things that I try to limit. But you also, I like how you talked about people are smarter. Would you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I agree, it's like the formulas don't work or the formulas change, but not everybody's caught on to that.
Yeah, the context, it constantly changes, right? You work in media, There are those cheap hooks. There are gimmicks. A lot of people are getting wise to the way a marketing funnel works. They know what a marketing funnel is. 10 years ago, you wouldn't hear anyone but marketers speaking about that. So they know how they're being romanced and they know how they've been romanced in the past. And a lot of people are in touch with the things that they don't like. Before, they might have been things that they raised an eyebrow at, but now they're much more discerning, where if they run into something that doesn't pass the sniff test, they're out of there, and they're out of there much more quickly. So whether that's just a tired hook on LinkedIn or a cheap looking landing page that's obviously trying to snag you into a funnel, consumers are smarter in terms of not falling into those traps. Again, they're looking for that smarter experience, the one with that human touch and with people that they really connect with.
All right, folks, a quick breather here. In my time building my business, I've come to a profound realization. Certain tools can be a game changer. That's why I'm excited to talk about Lead Feeder. It's a tool that helps you cut through the data and turn those website visitors into solid leads. Lead Feeder shows you which companies are checking out your site, tracking their behavior, and integrates all this with your CRM. Result? Your secret weapon for targeted lead engagement and making it easier for your team to convert website traffic into sales. Head to leadfeeder.com for a free demo and get a free extended premium trial when you let the rep know that you found about Lead Feeder through the It's Marketing's Fault podcast. All right, back to the show. So do you think I like how you mentioned like that landing page, they know what to expect. If like as a marketer or as a business, if your goal is to sort of send them down the funnel, so to speak, I mean, obviously you're wanting to educate and inform and do all that good stuff, but ultimately, you're trying to find customers. Do you think it's better to just be like totally upfront with it? Just like, we're going to give you the free stuff here, but if you want to go down the funnel, here's how to do it. I know it's a random question, but I'd just love to get your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think consumers are much more appreciative of folks being upfront. You see this a lot on TikTok Shop, which some people are saying TikTok's just turned into more or less the home shopping network, which could be a fair assessment. It's still one of my favorite platforms. But you have folks out there who, number one, aren't necessarily influencers in the way that we've grown to think of them. They're certainly not Instagram influencers from like 2014, 2015, say, right? They're not as polished, but they will show up and say, I just tried this freaking spatula. It's an amazing spatula. You guys know that I don't talk about things unless I actually use them and try them. The link is below. You can go buy it or not. I love this thing. And again, that's frank. It's upfront. It's really not even a funnel. It might not be the best example here, but what I'm saying is they're real about when they're selling and they're real about when they're not.
I like that. Real about when they're selling, real about when they're not. So do you think, I mean, it sounds like that could be something very helpful to sort of transpose into, say, LinkedIn or YouTube for businesses and content creators as well. Do you think that would be true?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And your audience will trust it.
I like that. The audience trust, because that's the ultimate goal, right? We just want to help, but we got to build trust. We have to be trustworthy. And then, so things have been changing from the way you say, definitely different than 5 years ago. So we've got a lot of businesses out there that they did a marketing plan. They came up with their marketing, their positioning, their strategy. They've got their website. They've got all their PDFs and one pagers. They've probably just created the message and forgot about it. Is that a good strategy, or do we need to like revamp on a frequent basis?
I mean, we've been talking for 5 or 10 minutes now, and all we've done is talk about how quickly things change within the digital media landscape. I think it's safe for us to assume and say that it changes that quickly in the business landscape too. Now, maybe not every 5 to 10 minutes like we were joking, but you're going to want to address your messaging at least every quarter. It doesn't have to be a deep dive, but the context of our work changes. The context of our audience's problems shift, as the economy changes, as discussions in different spaces changes. And if you're listening to your audience and gathering feedback, especially your testimonials, a great place, a great litmus test for how your messaging sizes up to what's going on outside of your business, right? There are going to be phrases. There's even going to be down to like the word that people start using and things that people stop using. In that way alone, your message will shift, but the value you bring is going to change over time too. You're going to have more expertise. Maybe you'll be able to bring costs down, or you're able to deliver faster. And that value proposition is going to change within the context that you change within as well. So your message, it's never a set it and forget it. No message outlasts everything. It should be a living, breathing component of your business.
And I appreciate that like quarterly reevaluation. Would you say that's applicable both to B2C businesses as well as B2B, or is there a difference between those two?
Not really. B2B, B2C, you're still at the end of the day working with people, and the language they use and the way that they're talking about their problems and what they want to achieve will continue to evolve.
That's wonderful. Now I have to ask this as well, because like I've been in large enterprise companies. I've been in the big corporations that move at a snail's pace, when it comes to change, and maybe they've got their marketing plan scheduled out for the next year to 18 months to 24 months. So if I'm in one of those companies, how do I begin to influence, be the change agent in those places to be able to sort of get people thinking on a much shorter time frame? Because like you said, this is not 1980, right? This is not like I can print 5 years worth of material and be done with it. This is a really changing environment. How can we be those change agents?
Sure. So compile what you're seeing first. If you're observing something, weigh your own mind against that, right? Make sure you can validate it for yourself. If you're catching a phrase, if you're noticing that things have shifted, right? Find a way to document that for yourself first and foremost. And then when you're really certain that the shift you're seeing is the shift that's occurring, you can try responding to it in real time. If you're working with a vendor, if you're working with a client, right? If there's a project happening, right? Test that language out, mirror the language back to them in real time. It could even be during a quick phone call. It doesn't have to be an overly formalized thing. and note how you're connecting. Note how they might also be parroting things back to you, or that you're able to deepen that conversation by way of having used that messaging or talking about what you do from a different position. And after you've done that a few times, right, a point is just a point. But when you've got a point and a point, you can start to draw a line. That's when you can then report back to your team, report back to leadership and say, hey, I noticed this. I tested it. I'm seeing great results. And this is why I think it's something we ought to consider in our next month, in our next quarter. Right? And that's how you can begin to be that change agent. And that works in a small company too, I should say.
And that's an excellent point. It's the gathering the data. It's not it. Then it changes from your opinion to here's what I'm seeing in the marketplace and through our conversations. Then it's a much easier sell.
Yep.
That's huge. So let me jump in, because as we were talking beforehand and as we were preparing for this call, you had talked about 3 principles, which I think a lot of people hold dear. Marketers hold, like, just this is sort of that change that's occurred over these last 5 years or so, I think. But you have a very different take on these principles, and so we'll just start running through them. So first, let's talk about nailing your unique selling proposition. So nailing your unique selling proposition, how does that work against you today?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have a different take on this. And I love the phrasing that you used. You know, we hold these things dear as marketers. And I absolutely do, even though I help my clients walk through them in a slightly different way. Think of them kind of like, I'm thinking of things that you hold dear, kind of like that older relative, right? And Agnes, you love her. She's great. And you have to know how she actually works. You have to know that you don't let her go for the second plate of crab legs at the wedding because she's going to have a stomach ache later. You have to know how Agnes actually works, even though you hold her dear, right? That's how I like to think of the marketing principles that we're going to talk about today, because they can hold you back if you're a boutique business, and they can also be like accelerant if you know how they function. With niching, right? We weren't going to start with niching. With unique selling propositions, a lot of folks, right? They deliver great value. Their brand is extremely valuable. They're giving strong results at every turn, but there's not a degree of uniqueness there. They'll spend a lot of time, though, looking for that message, looking for that phrase that captures this uniqueness or degree of betterness, right? And you can get caught up in that, and it starts to impact your performance overall, especially when you're boutique, you're small, and you're at the beginning of doing what you do so well. So I'd say, instead of focusing on creating a unique selling proposition, right? Again, that's a term we're borrowing from the corporate marketing world. Just focus on a CSP, or a clear selling proposition.
So a clear selling proposition. So how would you define clear selling proposition? What's that look like?
Sure. So I have a client down in South Florida. He runs a multi-million-dollar home service business. And he's at that 7 to 10 year mark, depending how you look at the milestones in his business. He's never used a USP, but he's shown up to BNI, he's shown up to networking events, and consistently said the same thing about his business over and over again, right? He doesn't have a clever tagline, right? And he hasn't spent that 7 to 10 years working to uncover what's unique about the way his business installs kitchens for people or hangs television sets, right? He's focused on that action and experience, and all of that's paid off for him. But within that CSP, or clear selling proposition, right? He says what he does, he says who he does it for, and he talks about the results that he delivers. And it's just that. Don't have to complicate it, right? If you're boutique, you're not IBM. You don't have resources to spend on detailed customer research or calling in a marketing agency or someone like me to help you think of slick language, right? You can never really force these things. It's going to be revealed to you over time in your business.
I like that. It sounds then like, I don't want to say experimentation, but almost as you go, you realize, okay, here's who I'm doing this for, here's what I'm doing, and here's how I make their life better. And it's, as opposed to the uniqueness, it's just being very clear on who you help and how you do it.
Mm-hmm. When I first started focusing on messaging and positioning, it was just that, and I'm now, again, I'm at that similar 7 to 10 year mark. You said it earlier in my intro, right? Messaging and positioning for service providers. That's the CSP right there, right? And so that their expertise is impossible to overlook. That other part that we mentioned, right? You don't need an MBA in marketing. I added that in over time because I noticed things in my process that people appreciated. They liked the way that I spoke about that. I don't have an MBA in marketing myself. And they saw that they could still get results while setting aside that more formalized, or I'd even say outdated thinking when it comes to marketing a business of this type.
I love that. You added it in over time. You've been able to tweak things, but you're still very clear on what you do. And I appreciate that too, because um, especially like that MBA thing, we can get so caught up in geek speak, um, that we actually lose what works and what non-marketers
Mm-hmm.
understand.
And you feel it. You'll get kind of restless with that CSP once you're at that turning point. I think everyone should have a unique selling proposition? Absolutely. Right. But it'll come when you're at that right moment in your business, and you'll get restless. You'll get itchy. You'll think, I'm bigger than this. There's some better things we need to incorporate there. And that's when you pull it into your positioning.
Gotcha. So the goal is you get the CSP, the clear selling proposition, or clear selling point. I'm sorry, which one is it?
Clear selling proposition, but let's call it a
Clear.
clear selling point. That's even more simplified. It feels tidy.
Okay. Yeah, the CSP, the clear selling point, and you have that. You work on that. You get that so that you are taking care of a group of people in a certain way with a certain result, and over time, the unique selling proposition will stir that restlessness to where you can define it more. But the unique selling proposition should not be our go-to at the beginning.
Yep. Unless, let's say you woke up, you had an epiphany, there's this business you want to create, it's going to cut through the market like a blade, and you know how it's different, fine. But I'd say that's less than 1% of all business owners.
I would agree. And I know, just even from my own experience, it is, it's that journey. It's that learning as you go and you figure out what's working, what's not, how to tweak it. It's hard to be unique when you don't even know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but being clear on what you're doing, it changes the game. So let's jump into principle number 2, which is define your mission, your vision, and your value. So how does that work against you?
So I'd say about half of my clients, I can speak from my experience here, are in the leadership development space. So they're coaches, they're consultants, right? So clarity of mission, vision, and values is so integral to their work. The other half, they're CEOs, again, of smaller practices, smaller boutique businesses, right? And they've paid for that type of coaching. And more likely than not, they've paid to have their team experience too. And they come out with these they're beautiful, clear-minded statements about what they stand for, what they're trying to do, how they behave and relate and act as they're trying to do that. And the thought is, well, we need these on our website. We need other people to connect with them, right? So that we're attracting our people, right? You've spent a lot of time and money to get there. Why wouldn't you put them on the website? But they do work against you. And it's in that those statements and that clarity is there to shift your decision-making and drive your decision-making as a brand, as a business owner. They don't actually drive the decision-making and the buying behavior of your audience or your prospective clients. It's just not how their minds work.
That's an excellent point in that, yeah, it's those values, that's internal. I want to buy something that works, right? I want to buy something that makes my life easier and better. And like, yeah, the other stuff doesn't come into play as much. So what would you do instead?
Hmm. The other thing before I answer that question, I want to say is, especially with that mission and vision, it is completely okay to build your business without some purpose of changing the world. It is completely fine to want to run a ship-shape business, make good money, create value for people, and then retire at a decent age.
Thank you for saying that, because I think we sometimes we hear all of these things, and again, I'm not against people who want to build businesses to change the world. That's great. I just want to take care of my family,
Yeah.
right? I want to help people. I want to serve people, but I think you're right. We can feel guilty about that. It's like, okay, I'm not like planting trees with 10% of my revenue, and that's a great thing if you do, but it's okay not to.
It's okay not to. And so you'll have these really inspirational statements, and your heart's in the right place, right? Putting all of that on the about page. You worked hard to get to those statements. You're feeling good about them. You feel inspired by them, which you should. Your goal is to inspire your audience, and you're going to fall short because, again, those statements are for you. So there's ways that you can flip these. And the thing to think overall is that you need to translate those into how you do things in your business. So you can look at your service process, right? And as part of that translation, look for how that value or how your purpose shows up in that service process. So if you're the type of person who says, one of your values is connection, and that means you want to connect deeply with other women entrepreneurs. And I ran into this just a couple weeks ago on LinkedIn. A woman portrayed that as her value, but wasn't responding to DMs, right? Or wasn't really giving us anything in the comment section. It makes your audience stand back and say, well, wait a minute, there's a small disconnect there. So having defined how that value shows up every touch point of your process, and then going back to your messaging and articulating that. And there's some phrases we can use, right, to flip that on an about page or any place where you're talking about what you stand for. So you'll want a phrase that allows you to flip that value, purpose, or mission right into a statement for your audience in terms of their objectives or what they want. So you could use some phrasing like, we understand what it's like to want to blank, right? We understand what it's like to want to elevate your voice with a great podcast. Maybe this was for Eric's about page. And then Eric might say something like, and that's why we That's why we make it really easy for you to talk to us. We do some editing out afterward, right? Because we understand what it's like to want to put your best foot forward. Eric would be connecting his value of quality, let's say that was one of the things that you said, to something the audience wants. And that's how you can achieve that translation.
It's really the show not tell kind of philosophy then but showing the audience in language that they get.
Mm. Yeah.
Versus like the 5 pillars that we have on our wall. And I appreciate that distinction, because I think times we get caught up in those things. And as you say, if it's not demonstrated in what I write, in the way I interact with people, it can seriously backfire on me.
Yeah. And it can be great too. It doesn't always have to be something that you plaster to your about page or any type of selling language, right? A lot of the time your clients will say things for you. I can't tell you how many times my clients have said in their testimonials, Erica made the process fun and easy. They'd say, I hate talking about messaging. I'm not a writer. She never made me feel dumb. And one of my values as a service provider is that level of curiosity and play. And the fact that they can articulate that for me does more than I ever could by just giving those statements on my about page itself.
So do you think that's so as businesses are evaluating their values or what kind of values they want to have or really what they bring to the table, is that a good way then to sort of figure out what your values are, is just kind of listen to what the feedback you're getting from customers?
I'd say you definitely want to be the arbiter of what your values are. You don't want to build that horse by committee, but it can be a good way, a good reflection back of how your values are being received or experienced. And again, it could be a different use of language. So some people might say fun, but others might talk about fun in terms of playfulness. Others might call it levity or humor, right? There's all of these layers. So you might change the word that you use to represent the value, but don't change the way that it shows up for you or the way that you want it to drive your service process. You always want to be in charge of that.
That makes sense. So really you're using their feedback as a very much a measuring stick to say, hey, are my values coming through in the way I'm interacting with clients, with just people in the world at large?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Excellent. I love that and that makes it easier to understand, am I being effective? Am I communicating it clearly? Because sometimes, especially, I mean, big corporations are awesome, right? They do a lot of good stuff, but sometimes they just get caught up in, and not just big ones, but small ones too. And so I appreciate just the trying to gain clarity on that. So let's look at principle 3 is find your niche. So how does that work against you? I was really looking forward to this one. How's it work against you?
This is the one where I think, again, a lot of small, medium-sized business owners have some mild trauma. I had a client show up to my message maker process the other day. It was her first session, and we were going to talk about her audience, how things align. And she put her hands up like this, and she said, I don't have a niche. I got to tell you, I don't have a niche. And I was there to tell her that that's okay. It is okay to have not a non-narrow segment of the population that you work with. It is okay not to have a hyper specialty in what you offer and who you offer to, especially as you're getting started. But again, I think to the client that I mentioned earlier during this conversation, he knows who he services, but it's not hyper segmented. And in fact, he wouldn't have experienced the growth that he did if he'd only focused on a certain type of homeowner, right? Is he geographically bound? Sure. But he's not hyper specialized. There's a lot that he can do from the position of focus as opposed to hyper niching.
Mild trauma. That's I that just speaks volumes to me because I know I have wrestled with that. It's like, what is your niche? How do you narrow it down? And yeah, I appreciate you saying it may not exist. You may have a focus, you may have a geographical boundary, but the niche may or may not be helpful in what you are considering and how you position your business. Um, so what should we do instead? Instead of this, instead of or finding our niche?
Yeah, so if you're not IBM, you have those limited resources. You want, again, like who you serve, right? What you do for them, that clear selling proposition. I want you to have that because niching can be a time suck in disguise. If you're not IBM, if you don't have a market research department. And you can do all of that work and still fail to take a strong position in the market. Think of niching. We'll do geography again. Think of niching like an address. My client came into that conversation and she was thinking that we'd narrow her down to a modest city block, right? Of maybe a certain number of households, maybe even down to the house number. But after about 20 minutes of conversation, right, we figured out that she could actually go from where she thought she was servicing, let's say, again, geography metaphors, the entire Eastern seaboard. And she narrowed it down to, a few buckets, right? Or you could think of it as like neighboring counties in a state. She knows she services two types of people, and they're professionals that exist in 4 to 6 different industries. So she's got these buckets. It's more like a ballpark that she gets to play within. And that's how you might think about achieving that focused, as opposed to that niche within a very small segment, which again can be difficult to do successfully if you're boutique, if you have a small to medium-sized business. Once you're at that point, the thing to then do is to differentiate. And I want you to be very clear about this when I say it, but be different in terms of what you believe, especially if you are that hybrid personal but business brand. What you believe is going to set you apart more than any other type of differentiation strategy within your messaging and positioning.
I love that. You have the focus as opposed to niching, and then separating yourself with what you believe. Would you just go into that a little bit more as far as the what you believe? What does that look like?
Yeah. So like we said, everyone's getting smarter and everyone's having more fun. And everyone's looking for more humanity in terms of the voices and creators that they engage with, that they buy from, right? So we're looking to know who you are on the inside. And again, tying that to that translation of how does it show up in your process, or even how does it show up in your content? And so you can use questions to uncover that layer of belief. And this is something that I do with my clients in my Message Momentum program, right? Where they're building that layer of thought leadership into their business. They've graduated from that CSP, and they're really ready to show up as a differentiated voice. So there's some things that you can focus on. And most people can answer these questions pretty quickly. The first one being, what's an accepted idea, right? Or even a mantra in your space that no longer passes your sniff test. You hear other people say it and you go, that's not actually it. And it's not something that you use within your business or within your content. It's probably one of your core beliefs, right? Diving deeper, if there's things that you see other service providers doing, operating, even if it's just an unworthy term of service that you think, I would never put that into a contract. Dig into that. Why is it important to you to do things differently? And those can start to be the perspectives and viewpoints that you articulate to connect with the people that you want to work with in the world. And then the last question, and this is the one that really gets people on fire. There are things that you're already saying, and I'm sure this applies in terms of your podcasting process, Eric, right? Things that you already say and do that when clients experience them, they say, I've never heard that before. I've been on 10 podcasts. Nobody's ever done it this way before. I love that. Write down the minute marker, jot a note, do whatever you have to do to remember what that quality or element was, because it probably points to something that you believe and that you should be articulating within your messaging to differentiate yourself from other people who do what you do.
I love that. Those are great ways to think of it, because we get caught up. I say we, as I'm guilty. I'm a marketer. How do you, if everybody's, for lack of a better description, if everybody's making the same type of widget, what sets you apart? You can't compete on cost, because Walmart always wins, or Amazon always wins, or the biggest, most efficient company always wins on price. Mm-hmm. So how do you differentiate yourself? And I really like how you said you go into what you believe, and those are those slightly intangible things, but that just connect with your personality, your beliefs. And I like how, so I'm going on a bit of a tangent. If I'm somebody who's like, that sounds awesome, I don't want to alienate anybody. How do you respond to that? Because I know there are going to be people listening who experience that very same thing. Like, that's awesome, but I don't want to push people away.
Okay, number one, too bad. Too bad is the first way I answer that question. But number two, your heart is in the right place, right? Especially when it comes to, I'll take it back to thought leadership. A lot of the way that we think about thought leadership or being that standout voice is rooted in ideas that no longer serve us. A lot of thought leadership, right? You think of um, disruption, right? And contrarianism and turning markets upside down and being bold. We're all exhausted, right? People are smarter and people are having more fun. What most people are looking for, and especially the folks I work with, they're helpers, they're thinkers, they like progress. Disruption can be exhausting. We've had all of the internet arguments, right? We've had all of the trolls show up. Now folks are looking for counterbalance. So really, in sharing that differentiated point of view, you don't have to do it in an angry way or in a loud way, but in a way that augments and expands rather than turning upside down. So too bad. And your heart is in the right place when it comes to thinking through this. You get to be that standout voice without causing turmoil and without exhausting anyone.
I appreciate that. And for everybody listening, like that is an incredible way to think of it, because a lot of times we think of, okay, I think of like, you need to differentiate, you have to pick a fight, you it's like, okay, what big bully are we going to attack? And like, and it's just not me, right? I'm not antagonistic. That just doesn't fit my personality. But you're saying that's not at all what we have to do. It's just simply a matter of finding the things that sort of get under our skin a little bit, or that we disagree with, and not taking our hammer and, trying to smash them, but really communicating in a very clear way how we do something different, and not picking a fight, so to speak.
Yeah. Are you a Game of Thrones fan by chance?
I'm not. It's one of those, I have not gotten into it because I was afraid I was going to get pulled, go down the rabbit hole completely. So
Well, it's worth it. So if you find yourself with the flu and want something to play in the background, definitely get started with Game of Thrones. But you can even look at, there's Game of Thrones, and then there's a new spin-off series, House of the Dragon, right? Game of Thrones happened pre-pandemic, House of the Dragon post-pandemic, right? And you can really look at what they say about our ethos and what audiences are hungry for. Game of Thrones is all about that disruption and that conflict and the fights getting started. And when you look at the premise of House of the Dragon, and I'm probably putting some of your listeners to sleep right now, nerding out, but House of the Dragon really is about this split of family and friends. And the entire time you're watching it, you're hoping that they find a way to come together. Right. And that's what we're looking for now. Everybody's hoping it can come back together, be expansive, right? Have those new possibilities, but without the exhaustion of disruption. Just keep shooting for that counterbalance like the House of the Dragon.
I love that. And I love that word. I love that phrase, that counterbalance, and that it is trying to do the other. And you're right, it is exhausting when you are trying to disrupt, when you're trying to go contrarian. It's just a daily fight.
And you will still, even with counterbalance, run into some fighters, but it's a completely different game. It's a completely different game than, say, the disruption game of 2014.
That's huge. So for everybody listening, take comfort in that, unless you are one of those fighters, in which case I'm sorry, you're just going to have to adapt, right?
Find a different podcast to listen to.
That's right. We'll just go ahead and alienate you now.
Yeah.
So you're probably best served elsewhere. But it's tough, right? We are in a marketplace that is rapidly changing, and it just seems like it's changing faster. And I don't know if that's simply the way, the results of the pandemic or anything else, but it's a very different landscape than 5 or 10 years ago. As we kind of wrap up, one takeaway that you'd like to leave the audience with?
A lot of corporate marketing principles weren't designed for the type of business you're building in the time that you're building it, right? You think about when marketing came to be, it was during the industrial age, right? Almost actually more than a century ago. And it was designed by people at the top of companies with a lot of capital, right? With a lot of bandwidth in order to act on those principles. So if you're running into advice that you're struggling to implement or that's taking up a lot of your time, it's not breeding the results that you're told that it will, you're allowed to raise an eyebrow. The whole reason that you've started a business is so that you could do things your way. I'm not saying to ignore best practices, but constantly look for the intersection of best practices and what's best for you, right? You can have a counterbalanced message. You can also have a counterbalanced business.
I like that. And I appreciate that because you're giving people permission, not that they need it, but sometimes I think we need to just sort of be verbally given that permission to say, it's not working for me. It's okay if I do something different.
Especially at the beginning.
Why at the beginning is that so important?
Well, like we said, you're going to have a CSP, not a USP, right? You're going to have mission, vision, and values, right? But we're not going to plaster those on the website. You've got to do things differently than Coca-Cola does because you're not Coca-Cola just yet. You may not have that niche. You may not even have those differentiated perspectives that we talk about at the very beginning. Experience is how you win those, and experience will be how you best articulate those, especially again, if you're bootstrapping. Once you're at that restless turning point, you're restless for a reason, right? And it's usually, I've seen it happen at 3 years, but usually 5 to 7 years in business where you finally have that thing to say. That's when you should launch into it. But at the beginning, you're still gaining all of that perspective and insight.
Erica, if people want to know more about you, more about your business, where do you want them to go?
Yep, you can visit my website, ericabrewer.com, and that'll be in the show notes. And I offer monthly workshops. It's my Idea Amplifier workshop where you can bring any one concept, idea, and insight that you might have in mind. And you'll work with me through a guided writing process to turn it into 3 or 4 messages that you can use immediately.
I love it. So ericabrewer.com, it's going to be in the show notes. Make sure to check it out. Connect with her on LinkedIn. She has some incredible content, incredible information. Erica, this has been a blast. I've learned a ton, and I've had a lot of fun. This has just been a fun conversation.
So good talking to you, Eric.
Okay, that was a wonderful conversation with Erica Breuer. So really 3 points that jumped out at me. The first is the way she described marketing strategies that worked 5 to 10 years ago. They don't work as well today. And I think that's important to remember. Audiences are smarter. And so what worked in the past does not necessarily work today. And I think especially as we are thinking about repurposing content, that gives us an advantage. I think if you are thinking of having your business and your content more from a media perspective as opposed to a simple funnel perspective, it gives you an opportunity to do a lot with it, whether you're taking your audio, leveraging it into video and text content, whether you're going the other way. It just gives you more opportunities, especially, and I've been talking about this a lot lately on LinkedIn, and in my newsletter, is this idea of really helping your sales team based on the content that you're creating. And that's really, you can do that with audio really well. Being able to create short podcast episodes for them that they can share with customers, talking about what objection handling, insights, great way to handle that. So we need to be rethinking some of our marketing strategies. Second point she mentioned, instead of focusing on that unique selling proposition, businesses should focus on a clear selling proposition, just states who they help and what results they deliver. I think this is really helpful too, just because, being clear always helps. One of my favorite marketing signs, when I see driving around is, will buy cars for cash or pay cash for houses and a phone number, because you know exactly what they do, you know exactly how they do it, and you know exactly how to contact them. And I think that is key. Third, and last point, really, you know, she talked about, instead of developing a narrow niche, you know, smaller businesses should focus on having, you know, those buckets, those categories of people who they serve. Yeah, and then just differentiate based, you know, through the process and through their content, as opposed to that disruptive strategy. And I think there's value to that too. You know, and I think as you do your business, especially as you're starting out, you know, you learn as you go, and it expands, and it gives you a better feel. The more people you talk to, the better you can just reposition yourself as you go along. And, you know, I talk to people about this when I'm helping them with podcasts. It's this idea of, you know, you have to start with a goal, and I have to start with a target, but then as you go, you can adjust, right? Because you learn more as you go. So, you know, talks about, again, I think that's an excellent point. Would love to hear from you guys as listeners. You can, you know, you can DM me on LinkedIn. Definitely check out buildthatpodcast.com. Sign up for the newsletter if you're not already signed up, or shoot me an email. Would love to chat. Eric at straightforwardmg.com. See you next week.